everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of the Goat Rodeo podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Smith, joined by regular co-hosts Simon Kuhn and Dave Cottle. I'm also reminded that we really should re-engage on that rotating in a fourth co-host thing. So anyway, anybody out there in listener land, you want to join to co-host us with us, feel free to reach out. Also, I'm currently drinking iced tea out of a like a generic, like Coke fountain drink cup. Yeah, I was reminded as I was sipping on this that we still haven't gotten Rip It outreach for sponsorship. So
the radio silence for some reason. I can't figure out why for the life of me.
Radio silence. Yeah, I
So
don't get
strange.
it. I don't get it. We'll take it when it comes. Did you guys have a good 4th of July?
Yeah, watched Independence Day.
Oh,
Can't get better.
Of course you did. So did I. Simon, you and I decided that there might have been some overlap between our viewings and your viewing. We're distanced by a couple of time zones, but I think there was a little bit of overlap, which felt good to me. That felt really good.
Dave, you went to a parade, right?
Yeah, we were in the boat parade on Lake Michigan with a decorated boat, and my daughter took it upon herself to decorate her bike for a bike parade, and she dressed up as the Statue of Liberty and put some of the more popular quotes from the poem that's inscribed on the Statue of Liberty on the side of her bike, and she won first place.
You're weak and weary?
For being a great American. Yeah, Week and Weary was on one of them.
Can't beat it. Your daughter's awesome.
Can't beat it. Yeah,
Big W.
You guys are so patriotic, Dave.
That's what it's all about.
Here I was just, like reveling in Bill Pullman's speech, and you guys are actually like physically out in the world demonstrating patriotism. That's amazing.
Someone told me during my July 4th cookout that the French had unveiled some sort of painting that it had the Statue of Liberty covered in a cloth, which my response was all of the French did this collectively, and it sort of shut down the conversation. I won't be tolerating any America slander on July 4th. We're not having this conversation. It's basically what my response was.
Yeah, I mean, tolerance of intolerance can only go so far, Simon? It can only go so far. That wasn't a jab.
Exactly.
I'm just saying.
The
I think we
intolerant
agree on
French.
that. Yeah. No. I think that's right. Dave, I'm just learning. You guys have a boat? Why? How? I haven't been invited.
No. Never own a boat. Never own a boat. Have a friend with a boat. My father-in-law. My father-in-law meticulously maintains the boat.
Yeah.
And is captain of the boat. We are the decorating committee, though.
Excellent.
That's the best possible situation. You benefit
100%.
from it as almost as directly as you possibly can without ownership. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have a friend with a boat and a friend with a pool, and own neither.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think what's the common quip about boats or yachts? It's a hole in the ocean where you throw money or something like that. Ownership. So yeah, I'm with you. We have people in our close circle who have boats on prominent lakes. And I'll tell you that friend ownership has been a good benefit to, let's say, the co-founding set of Reveal. That's been nice. Okay, let's talk about big news of the week. I got a couple of items here on my short list. One is there appear to be signals, and I'm referencing a New York Times piece and a couple of others. There appear to be signals coming out of the Middle East that the recent, call it Israel, U.S. direct interventions, diplomatic pressure, a really tragic, brutal war conflict going on between Israel and Gaza, and a whole range of other things seems to be materializing potential for peace or normalization or something between historically kind of, adversarial parties. So we're talking like Israel, Saudi, Israel, Lebanon, Israel, Iran has cooled off for obvious reasons. Syria with its new leadership, with sanctions lifted by the U.S. and a whole range of other things. But, we saw Abraham Accords and Trump won. We saw some amount of like stasis potentially during the Biden administration. We saw a big spike of conflict recently. Are we on a pathway to normalization and peace? Is that too much to hope for? Simon, you're monitoring things from inside the Beltway more than I am. What do you think?
It's the entirety of the Middle East peace process feels very chicken or the egg. We've seen reporting of signals out of Lebanon that there's some real optimism. about disarming Hezbollah and
Right.
reincorporating them back into the official government of Lebanon. But we've also seen reporting that Lebanon, that Hezbollah's requirement for disarmament starts with Israel's withdrawal from South Lebanon. So I think it's very much like who's going to put their gun down first, right? I mean, you've spent so many decades holding it up. I think Syria is much more interesting, right? Like you have much more of a fresh start in Syria, so to speak. And we're seeing a lot of, I think, really interesting and surprising diplomatic maneuvers by the new Syrian regime. So I think, I mean, in the next 6 months, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw some sort of Abraham Accords Part 2 or even a more formal sort of alliance structure emerge out of that Abraham Accords structure that, began under Trump 1.
I remember thinking back to, I forget the exact timeline here, maybe like October, November of last year. I remember thinking, why is Israel doing all of this kind of like kick them while they're down Syria airstrikes on munitions stockpiles, on radar facilities, on apparently supply chain kind of depots and whatever else? I was like, aren't we already on kind of like a new administration or a new regime coming into power after the fall of the Assad regime? And then I put that back into context when we saw the 12-day, I think they're calling it the 12-day war now, Israel, Iran, and what Israel was doing was denying Hezbollah a supply chain, and they had to clear the flyover airspace over Syria to get to Iran. They didn't want any kind of obstructions there. I think like this was Israel being kind of like cold, realist, brutal in their strategic calculations around going after Iran. And maybe we should have put those. I'm sure there were analysts who were putting all these, reading these tea leaves the right way. And this is just lay person Garrett, getting caught up. But pretty interesting. And another interesting snippet here for Syria. And then Dave, if you got something you want to jump in on here, great. Or I can pivot topics. But president, I think he's called the president, al-Shara from Syria, is like legitimately former Al-Qaeda. And like, I think the Israelis think that he could potentially still harbor some jihadist, anti-Western or anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic, whatever roots.
He spent years in an Iraqi detainee facility.
That's right. Yeah. So like,
like years.
How constructive a partner could he possibly be in that role? But at the same time, like Trump's offered him a pretty big olive branch, like no sanctions. Let's have a clean start. You want to be a constructive partner in the region? Great. We'll welcome you in. Just stop being violent. Stop exporting jihadism. So it's pretty interesting.
The flip side, of course, right, is that the Houthis sunk another ship.
Yeah, true. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not over.
I think the Israelis have certainly created a lot of like diplomatic and strategic decision space for themselves with like speed and surprise and violence of action. But if I had to guess in the like quote unquote more democratized era of warfare that we're entering with drones and autonomous systems, let's look at it again in a year and see what these insurgent groups look like, morph into. I figure a lot of folks go to ground in the short term, but I think it's smart to have a healthy dose of skepticism about the endurance of these emerging olive branches, right? Let's give them some time, see if they can take root.
What you're saying is that despite the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be ready to nominate President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, maybe that's premature. Let's wait.
Yeah, well, that's actually late because the deadline was in January. But I would say just sit tight for, like Hamas seems to be heavily degraded, and particularly at the leadership level. But I wouldn't count out Hamas too.
Sure. Yeah. Dave, any reflections? You want me to pivot to the next topic?
No, I think you guys pretty much captured my sentiment. Brief, like the Middle East, peace in the Middle East, brief periods of optimism followed by like, and the Houthis just sunk another ship. Like that's pretty much. I think that's pretty much.
We're gonna hit some peace deals. We're gonna plus up the Indo-PACOM budget, and then we're gonna let CENTCOM come back around and take it again.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
So let's pivot to a much simpler topic: Ukraine, Russia, and highlight the idea that in the Trump inner circle amongst the policymaking set, cabinet, and just outside of the cabinet, you have an element led, I think, by Elbridge Colby, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who basically is the one advocating for how the defense and military posture around the world should be configured. He is, I think, what you would refer to as a prioritizer. There's kind of three big camps. There's the primacists, kind of the OG neocon, more willing to intervene, more willing to like throw weight around as a superpower and be dominant in every region around the world at all times. So that's kind of the primacist camp. I think that's waning in some ways amongst the Republican and even some cases Democratic lawmakers and policymakers. There's the neo-isolationists or the restrainers, the people who are kind of like diehard America first, let's retrench, let's not intervene around the world. And then there's this kind of middle ground area led by at least in current appointee land, Elbridge Colby, who are prioritizers. And prioritizers, in his flavoring, want to reorient energy and resources toward the China adversary or the China problem set or the Indo-Pacific problem set because and this is their reasoning, not enough resources to prioritize everything. We need to prioritize around the geostrategic thing going on, and this is China. So to recap, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a pause in U.S. arms shipments and aid to Ukraine. And this was seen as a feather in the cap of the Elbridge Colbys, who want to deprioritize the Ukraine-Russia support complex, allow NATO to take care of that, or Europe to take care of it, and start orienting energy to the Indo-Pacific. You also have, relatively recent intervention in the Middle East. Again, not a priority thing for a guy like Elbridge Colby and his group of thinkers within the Republican establishment. But then Trump, being somewhat mercurial in maybe a good way, maybe a bad way, I don't know, but it's definitely his negotiation style. It's kind of live in public, A/B test different policies, and it looks like they're in conflict. And so he turns on aid, military aid back to Ukraine. There's a bit of a whiplash effect, right? Like Defense Department, executive branch, all kind of like maybe misaligned there. Simon, what's going on? Is this just Trump style or what?
No, this is the same problem that we have with the Middle East, which is you don't get to pick your conflict. The conflict picks you more often than not.
The enemy has a vote, in other words.
Yeah. And in the U.S., regardless of how you feel about what we should do in the world, we are looked to every time something goes south. And so when you look at what happened in Ukraine and Russia is, you saw this relative pause. We didn't turn off aid, but it showed up late, or, it hadn't shown up yet. And then Putin launched a whole bunch of offensives and clearly is flouting conceptually a peace process. He has no interest in playing nice. He's going to squeeze every advantage. And I think President Trump felt disrespected by that, right? And so then he's like any leader is going to say, what are we doing about this? And he finds out that we're deprioritizing here. And it's always going to be hard to prioritize a China threat when you have kinetic action happening in other theaters. And if you look at like the ROI, both strategically and diplomatically, recent actions in Iran and certainly the actions in Ukraine for almost the entirety of the conflict have been phenomenal wins for the United States. If you look at how much resources and treasure and blood we've spilled, very little compared to huge strategic outcomes. So I'm not surprised at all. I think that, this idea of having these really robust conversations around prioritizers and realist thinking is a luxury. It's a luxury that doesn't exist for our allies who are fighting. And, to your point, the enemy gets a vote.
Yep. Enemy gets a vote. So maybe to put a cap on this, and again, Dave, feel free to chime in if you'd like. I'm citing an AP article here titled "Trump Caught Off Guard" by Pentagon. So it looks like there was a limited amount of consultation between the Colby Hegseth crowd at the Defense Department on the aid pause, the military arms pause, and the White House. And so it looks like Trump, realizing, oh, there's been a pause, now has this opportunity to like ramp it back up and direct that something change. And I don't know if that's real discord and blame or if this is theater, because I think that there's always a little bit of both going on. But we'll see.
you're seeing signals out of the Senate as well to ramp up sanctions on Russia.
That's right.
So, it is hard to read the tea leaves, I think, internally, but for sure, what you're seeing is a lot of folks in the current admin, the current ruling political party of America, as being disrespected by Russia. Like we're trying to de-escalate this thing, and you're clearly not interested. So they're looking at putting it back on, which I think is great because I think Ukraine is a righteous fight.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's tough to balance it or juggle it with all the other priorities, right, going on in the world. But I think we do as well. I heard an interesting Walter Russell Mead, who's a public intellectual and an academic, Hudson Institute and University of Florida and a few other places. He described the Trump style as kind of like stirring things up and creating a kind of a chaotic whirlwind kind of vortex. And by doing that allows for possibilities and opportunities to emerge out of that. But like the reality is that chaos or seeming chaos is like the perceived, or observed experience for a lot of us out here wondering what the hell's going on on the inside. I think like we're probably all interested in seeing this trend in a positive direction. Dave, any commentary on this one? I know Simon and I beat that dead horse.
No, I think the only thing you miss is the Pope is now calling for mediation.
Oh, the Pope. Oh, he's from Chicago, isn't he?
I thought for sure he was going to call for another crusade. I'm shocked to find out that the Pope wants peace. Who would have thought?
Total sidebar here, but I've read a few things recently about how involved the Vatican was in kind of like Cold War shuttle diplomacy, backdoor kind of mediation, track 2, track 3 stuff during the Cold War. Pretty interesting, actually, an interesting history there.
Yeah,
okay,
I mean, so they actually did feature in like the Bosnian War, Colombian,
totally.
like.
So there's a very large like religious political aspect to the Ukraine Russia thing, right? The Orthodox split from the Catholic Church features very heavily, and I actually think it really undercuts some of the Catholic Church's ability to be that mediator that it used to be.
Well, that isn't the only thing that undermines, the position of the religious among us in geopolitics. So with all that going on in the Europe context, I've been monitoring a few deal book kind of venture industry stuff, which might be interesting for some of our audience. Analysis, this is referencing a couple of observations from the past couple of weeks, specifically around 20 some odd, I think 28, 29 of the 30 plus NATO member countries rogering up to a 5% defense spending to GDP target over the coming years. There has been, I think, I'm referencing an article, an analytic piece by Taylor Wessing. I don't know how viable this is as a news source, but it seems to jive with other sources that I've looked at. In 2024, defense investing in Europe reached $5.2 billion. Dual use defense tech investing in the United States was hundreds of billions of dollars, just as a comparison. But it does appear to be rising, and it does comprise roughly 10% of all European VC funding across the entire continent. And I think that is useful, and the trend line is up, especially with increased NATO spend and kind of re-livening of the European defense industrial base. I'm thinking larger vendors like Airbus or Rheinmetall or Leonardo or others in the continental space as well as the UK space. I think this is useful and interesting. The increased NATO spending over the next many years basically means an expansion by trillions of dollars of the defense industry TAM for young companies kind of thinking about breaking into this market. I think if you'd asked me a year ago if we maybe plateaued or maybe we're looking at kind of a pause or a decrease in defense venture activity, I would have said maybe. I think right now I see nothing but heat. I think this is still heating up, and I think it will continue to heat up. And we're going to touch on some of the policy-related topics that I think streamline and continue to excite that activity in industry here in a few minutes. But any reflections from you guys? Maybe reflections from our observations in Europe, going to market in Europe or elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm bullish as well. I mean, I think even I can't remember if you were on it this morning. We were touching base with some of our customers prospective customers in the region. Like it's what we're intending to do is align with NATO defense priorities, increase engagement with the NATO member states, right? We're engaged with Germany and Poland and the UK. You mentioned your major European defense contractors, so like deepening those relationships. And NATO has their own set of standards and compliance as well, just like working with the United States government unilaterally. So getting through compliance and tailoring our offerings to NATO standards are all things that, we see the writing on the, I see the writing on the wall the same way as you do. So we intend to invest there.
Well, I mean that's its own kind of weird Byzantine, maybe even arcane acquisitions ecosystem in the same way that we encounter here in the U.S. But I think we're seeing current stuff move in the direction of streamlined acquisition activities that are quite favorable to those of us in the defense technology kind of renaissance ecosystem. Do you want to dig into that?
Yeah,
topic?
yeah. So I'd like to. I think you're probably referencing the latest news, the Speed Act, which I was hoping to talk about anyway here. So the Speed Act, which, and Simon's probably going to correct me because I probably have this wrong.
You're going to do a great job, and I'm excited to hear you do it.
All right, so I'm gonna dabble in Capitol Hill affairs, and Simon can critique me. All right, so Speed Act, coming from the House. I think this is Mike Rogers and Adam Smith, Simon. But what it looks like, not a Hill expert, what it looks like to me, from reading some of the articles around it, it looks like an intended wholesale replacement of the DoD acquisition system. So the key elements here that jump out at me are they intend to further empower the program executive officers and program executive offices with more authority. So going beyond just like shoppers of the DoD against requirements, and it looks like they get real authority to select winning technologies and integrate them into their portfolios. It looks like the big one here is it looks like they intend to completely replace the requirements process. I mean, completely replace JSIDs, the way the requirements are done in the Department of Defense.
I mean, that's a big freaking deal, right? I mean, this is like huge. This is the thing you hear me bitch about all the time. Like JSIDs is slow, JSIDs sucks, JSIDs is broken. You hear this all the time. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that's the sentiment out here in private sector land. Right?
Everybody in our industry. Well, in the public sector, I think they largely agree with you. I mean, I don't think anybody's happy with 800 days. 800 days on average.
Maybe. I would say the legacy primes are probably quite happy with it because they've infused themselves so deeply into that system that they're in some ways one and the same, or at least that's like the conspiracy theory tinfoil Garrett take on it.
Sure, but if Mike Rogers and Adam Smith get what they want here, those legacy contractors might have to start acting differently, because what they're proposing is, okay, if we wholesale replace JSIDs, on average, you guys take about 800 days to validate a requirement, which is way too slow. You now have 90. You have 3 months. You have 3 months to validate a requirement, which is huge.
We're referencing a Defense Scoop article. That's what I'm looking at right now, Dave. I don't know if that's the same one.
Yeah, I think so. I think probably largely the same information from multiple news sources as well.
Sure.
So in a couple of these articles cite, Anduril or similar as an example, right? So partner with the user community, partner with the acquiring authority, really understand the user needs or desirements of right now, not of when those requirements were written 800 days ago, but what their needs are right now, tailor it with the program office to increase its integration readiness level, make it work with their other stuff, and fit within one of their programs or one of their priority items. And that program office has programming, planning, budgeting, and execution authority to move that technology into the field. And this act is also proposing that we realign the incentives of those offices to be speed to the field and impact of the capability, as opposed to the misaligned incentives that we've worn out on this podcast in the past. So I'm actually really excited about this. I mean, in previous episodes, we talked about DIU's problem of transition, getting from we like it to we bought it. This is giving like the PEOs some actual teeth, and align with the last episode we were talking about the new authorities for RDT&E. If you're a PEO and you're responsible for an end user, if you're responsible for a set of end users, a specific job or type of unit, and equipping them in the United States military, you can look for best-in-class capabilities that meet their needs right now, have some RDT&E to finish those things or integrate those things, and then buy it. Regardless if the national defense strategy and the academic community wrote down lengthy annexes for this capability years ago.
I'm seeing a couple of notes in here, and I'm looking at probably the same articles that you are from like Defense, Breaking Defense, Defense Scoop, National Defense Magazine. I'm one of the items here is to create an office called the Rapid Directorate. I mean, the marketing around this is amazing, kind of like the Inflation Reduction Act, which may or may not be tied to actually reducing inflation. I'm wondering if, this is actually tied to being more rapid or speed and all these kind of headliner marketing angles on the legislation. But this Rapid Directorate, so it's Requirements Acquisition and Programming Integration Directorate. Is this just bureaucratic layering on bureaucratic layering? Are we creating yet another layer? And while saying that it's going to accelerate things, it's just yet another layer. I mean, I'm worried about that.
My understanding is that Rapid is intended to be the replacement for the JSIDS process. And that Rapid is the intended solution to validate requirements within 90 days.
Sure. I mean, that would big. That's a drastic change, right?
Yeah, it's a huge change, right? The way that I mean, JSIDS is an eye chart, right? If we pulled up on the screen what JSIDS looks like from soup to nuts, it's incredibly complicated. But to distill it down, we read the national defense apparatus documents, right? The National Defense Strategy, the Army Plan, the Navy Plan, et cetera. We have an academic community that reads all of those things, tries to determine what we don't have or can't do today that those strategies are calling for, and then distill those down into material acquisitions. I mean, changes, force modernization changes on a whole, but including material acquisitions and buying or investing in new things. That is a very long process. What this is describing is what is the need of the combatant commander, the warfighter, the program office that equips them right now. You have 90 days to decide whether or not that is a requirement that you're going to start procuring against. Here is some money to finish those capabilities and include them in your programmatic portfolio and get them in the field. That is what Rapid is designed to do.
And so to this specific question, the SPEED Act has a significant number of repeals of historical statutes as it's doing this. The Senate counterpart to the SPEED Act repeals 300 prior statutes. So no matter what happens here, they're ripping out a ton of old law when they institute this stuff.
So this is coming out of HASC. This is the House.
Yeah,
it's coming out of the HASC. It's bipartisan on its face, anyway. There's going to be some sort of Senate response. I mean, how real is this legislation, Simon? Is this going to happen?
So what I would actually say is this is the House response to.
Oh, this is the House. Oh,
yeah,
sure. Yeah, you're totally right. Yep.
And how real is it? Is extremely. So they're both happening right now. So the House and the Senate are both marking up their national defense authorization bills. The Senate has the Forged Act to reform the acquisition process, and the House has the SPEED Act. Both of those bills were introduced by the chairmen of those committees. So you can expect a huge amount, if not all, of these bills to be included in their respective NDAAs from each chamber. Where things get stickier as far as trying to figure out what here is going to become law of the land is finding out, which provisions of the two bills are compatible with each other and which provisions of the two bills are going to require that the Senate or the House give way to the other. They're going to have a bona fide negotiation about what acquisition reform looks best like. And so, like, to Dave's point, Rapid is like a whole scale rip and replace, essentially. They're going to kill the thing and put something else in place. That's not what the Forged Act does. It does a bunch of different things. The Forged Act leans a lot heavier on reforming the PEOs and the way these program management offices look and operate. It does do some work to the requirements process, but it's revisions of the existing legacy requirements process where speed is kill the old, put a new one in place.
Yeah.
So it's going to be real fascinating. You're like I said, each chamber of Congress, the Senate and the House, is going to finish their NDAA this month. Like they're both going to be completely done this month. So you're not going to see this compromise product this month. You're going to see these two separate products. And then they're going to have to reconcile between both of those probably after we come back from the August recess. A conference bill is what we call it when the House and the Senate pass something separate and they have to conference it. I would imagine during the August recess that the committee staffs do a lot of the heavy lifting of conferencing. Most of that happens at that staff level, right? Conferencing, they'll assign specific members from each, the Senate and the House, to be a part of the conference committee. And those folks will kind of close door, get together and knock it out.
So let's say I've got a couple of questions. Maybe it guides the rest of the conversation. Maybe it doesn't. And Simon, this is something between yours and Dave's kind of agenda items here. So boot me from the conversation if you'd like. But question one, if this passes, either as standalone legislation or as part of the NDAA or whatever, we would expect this to go into effect immediately upon bill signing. And then the trickle down effects go into place immediately. Like we on the industry side will immediately see these or is there going to be kind of like a transition phase where PEOs need to figure out how to do their job, and once again, and this rapids thing goes into effect and JSIDS kind of wanes. I mean, what's this transition period? In other words, is this thing going to impact companies like ours in the next quarter, in the next 5 quarters, in the next 10 quarters? Like what
I think you'll start to feel it in the first quarter. But it's not instantaneous, right? When laws get passed, the executive agents then have to go release guidance about how they want to see that. So you're going to see a whole raft of new memos coming out of SecDef's office and service offices saying this is how this is going to look in execution. So it's going to take them months to execute this. The NDAA passes every year. It usually doesn't have these rip and replace type of muscle movements. It's usually tweaks. So normally the DoD is very quick at implementing new NDAA guidance because they're just steering by degrees and they can kind of shift in place. If they do something like rapid, that's going to take months. It's going to take months just to figure out what it looks like and who's in charge of what, and replace everybody's charts and orgs with the new shape of things to come.
However, we're going to be waiting with bated breath, because if Rapids does survive, or something that looks like that, a wholesale replacement of JSIDS, that's going to fundamentally change how companies, my peer group, calculates go to market. Right now, I mean, myself and in the startups and smalls, sure, but also even the traditional contractors are always focused on either forthcoming or already validated requirements. Right, that's a part of the key recipe of ingredients that you need for DoD contracting, is those established requirements that were usually written quite a while ago. What it means is that we would stop focusing on chasing those published validated requirements down, and we would put even more chips appropriately where they're supposed to be, which is end user engagement and finishing the capability with the program office, with the acquiring authority, which is huge. So end user has a pressing need. You design, build a thing to spec. You work with the office to make sure that it fits their program and integrates with their other thing, and then get it in the field. So more IRAD investment on the industry side, less lengthy S&T time on the DoD side, and the center of gravity for all of it becomes the shoppers, the acquiring authority, which I think is correct.
It also seems to align up pretty well with something we discussed last week out of the President's budget request, which is the way the Army is starting to look at spending RDT&E at more of this late T&E, call it integration style RDT&E spend rather than science projects.
That was budget activity 9, I think we called it, right? That's that flavor of RDT&E, but BA.
And so to clarify, there is always a budget activity 9 that exists in all services budget, but in the Army's budget, they redefined what budget activity 9 is, and they changed it. So it's a very particular type of late stage RDT&E that doesn't exist in the other services budgets right now.
Got it.
I also want to flag real quick for folks that War on the Rocks has a really good chart of these two different bills, sort of comparing like to like sections. So if you're looking for a place to kind of dig in a little bit in plain English as opposed to legal language, I recommend War on the Rocks is Peace on the Speed and the Forged Act.
Yeah, maybe we can drop that in show notes. I'll be clear. I don't know that we actually generate show notes on this podcast. Maybe we do. Ian, do we? I think we do. If we do, let's
Ian, this
include
is a
that link.
task. Now you have to generate show notes.
Put all these links.
If we do, or if we start doing it, let's include that link on there because I have it up here in front of me and it is very useful,
But
especially to somebody who needs to see things graphically.
But if I can sort of have the last word there, I'm excited about whether or not we get everything that's in either of these acts. Like I'm really excited about it because what it would mean is we would be able, I think, largely as an industry, we would move in a direction that we really want to go, which is intimately focused on the problem rather than the process by which we get things to the field. And so if we can have fewer people focused on the process and tracking the requirements and the validation process, et cetera, and more folks focused with the user and the office on the problem, I think better for the industry, better for Uncle Sam.
Couldn't agree more. If we can maybe like stay on that topic briefly, say hypothetically, I'm a new entrant, a startup. I've got a little bit of venture money. I've got a prototype that's like 30, 40%, TRL4 or whatever it is. And the old experience would be go out and win a SIBR to inform the requirements process, go out and raise a bit more venture money to help bridge you over the valley of death, do your 800 days of penance in the defense tech wilderness before a requirement goes live, and you've got all the compliance stuff, boxes checked. What's the difference now for, startup, the hypothetical startup I just described with hypothetical TRL 4 or 5 widget? Like, what's the difference there? What's the difference in experience?
Ask your user community the most pressing need that they have. Build a solution with whatever budget you have to say 75%. Take it to the program office and say, what do I need to finish from a compliance perspective, from an integration perspective, so that when we're done building this thing and the users validated it, you can buy it. And then use that information to finish it completely with some expectation of procurement.
So the experience for a lot of folks in that category I just described, not knowing any better, not knowing that the average is 800 days or whatever, not knowing any better, would go and do exactly what you just described. And then they would eventually come to understand that there is no requirement. They've gotten like the end user might say, this is my most pressing problem, right? Like, or this is the technology gap or that we're experiencing or whatever. And like a startup can go and whip up a TRL 7, 8 prototype in like days in some cases, especially if it's software, right? And you go back there and you're like, we're ready to go. We're at 75%. We're TRL 7 or 8 or whatever. Oh, wait, we have to wait the, plus 800 days for a requirement to come around. What's that difference? Because the requirement piece is the requirement and available budget are the two kind of items that stymie a lot of companies at that stage.
100%. It's actually, I'd say it's 5 things this time of year, right? Needs or interest, requirements, funding, contract, and priority.
Sure.
Yeah, requirements is always a huge one. Priority is always the other one.
Sure.
Like you're not having to swim towards that requirement or get that answer from the program office. The program office is no longer going to tell you like, hey, we don't have a requirement for this, because if I understand this correctly, Rapid says that they're largely responsible for generating the needs of that user community and addressing them. So the program office, like, you just have to ensure that they're interested too, and that they agree with you that that's a problem for the user community and that your solution can address it. So it's actually a lot more friendly and reduces barriers to non-traditional contractors whose going in assumption or position is we're going to go get the end users excited and get the people that can pay for it excited. So that strategy that they've been using, which has been incorrect so far, would actually be correct starting next year.
So let's say Rapid happens. The act goes into effect. Rapid is stood up. Are we just like, are startups like us or even younger than us? Like, you no longer have to approach the customer knowing about or needing to shape a future requirement. Is that the bottom line here? They can spend money and acquire and field things without a requirement. Is that what we're saying?
That's what's written pretty much in black and white in these publications, and I hope
would
that's the case.
caution
And I hope
against that. I would caution against that.
Meaning, what caution? Like that might
So
not actually be the case, or we're misreading it, or what?
There's still a resourcing problem, right? At some point, like this does not solve the POM process. So you need early interaction with your customer if they're ever going to find resources to budget for purchasing your stuff. So let's say we completely solve this requirements problem and the customer's on board and everybody's on board and you've crushed it. If you're lucky, you get some sweep up funds for a year or two until they can like get through the 3-year POM cycle to get you up and running. So my recommendation is that as soon as you are physically capable as a company to start interacting with your customer too, don't just stay in this end user foxhole, which is fun and very easy to be like, man, we built the coolest thing in the world with these war fighters who know what they're talking about. And then I just met these jerk offs who don't understand. These guys have been doing it for 20 years. It's full of, it's, in my experience, full of guys who come from operational units and decided to get into the acquisition game to solve hard problems. And then you'll see these companies who sometimes have some sour grapes, and like all these PMs just don't get it. Like, yeah, some of them don't, but some of them have done the thing and are here trying to solve the problem with you.
Hold on, to clarify, I'm not advocating for ignoring the acquiring authority at any part in this process, Simon. I'm saying you come from the range with the user to the program office. The first interaction is not, hey, buy a bunch of my stuff. The first set of interactions is, this is our experience with the user community. This is how we think we're solving their problem, or preferably they say it for you. This is how we believe we're solving their problem. You have a better view on this related problem across the larger force. What could we do to finish this in collaboration with you or with our IRAD budget so that it's purchasable and integratable into your program or your portfolio? And that conversation, to your point, happens as soon as you can possibly have it, which starts the collaboration with that office as you finish the capability with their user community so that it's purchasable on the back end.
That all sounds great. That sounds like what we've been doing for 6 or 7 years as a company, right? That sounds like what we've been doing. And I hear that their intended impact is to accelerate things from 800 days to 90. I'll believe it when I see it.
I feel very similar. I mean, I just touched on it a little bit, but there's a very big back end to this, which is money. And it ties back into the conversation we had last week about Budget Activity 9. And it's that these acquirers are going to need more flexible ways to spend their money if they're going to keep up with an acquisition process that's this fast. And this is a congressional challenge. The Armed Services Committee can rewrite the policies of how we do things, but they can't really unlock dollars. Only the appropriators can rewrite the way dollars can be spent. So there's a second piece to this that needs to happen. Or I say that we could just end up in another big CR where there's no laws and rules about how you spend your money and you just kind of wing it.
But think about it this way. If you're the general officer that is responsible for this portion of the Department of Defense, this job, this type of unit, this capability, if you're responsible for this type of capability, and you're now granted the authority to not be onus to the legacy JSID's requirements system of the shopping list of what you're told to buy, but you still have the same budget as you have had to shop for those things that you have been told to buy, then it comes down to prioritization. It's not really a funding issue. It's which of the items do you think are going to be most impactful in the battle space? And then you can prioritize and buy those, as opposed to the shopping list that you were giving from the JSID's process.
I think this will probably end up in the short term looking really good for new things that are not currently mired in big old legacy contracts or platforms that have existed for a long time. So as the Army and all the services are looking at buying attritable drones and loitering munitions, this will probably be a real godsend because they've already been positioning themselves to get tranches of money to buy things, and now they're going to get their handcuffs taken off on what they can buy and how they can spend it. However, that's not everything. And there's lots of places where you have contracts already in place and you have programs of record that have been around a long time. And this doesn't fundamentally change that yet.
No, and it's not going to, I don't see anything in here that suggests that it's going to impact the big five, right? This is not intended for long range precision fires type capabilities.
To be clear, some of this bill will. both speed and forged. I mean, you look at forged and it says anything built by a non-traditional contractor is to be treated as commercial henceforth. There's massive things that will touch the big five.
It's even more aggressive. It's even more aggressive than
both of these things are swinging for fences in a huge way, and I think.
But in the case of a relatively more exquisite or defense unique item like a Patriot missile battery, but let's say a hypothetical future program that replaces Patriot or something. Mm-hmm. What you could see coming out of this type of legislation is a few startups cobble together a bunch of VC money, go and build something that is 75% viable to compete against a legacy system or a defense prime offering. Because they're non-traditional, they're going to be treated as a commercial solution, even though it is a defense specific item. Is that what I just heard you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I read the Forge Act, right? You're now offering a commercial solution because you're a non-traditional.
So commercial the moniker of commercial solution is tied now to size or funding or age of company rather than whether it's actually.
No, because we've also redefined non-traditional.
Yeah, that's true.
So it does a lot of things at once. You can see a lot of very large non-traditionals.
Was that also defined in the Forged Act? Is that where we covered that?
The Forged Act spends more time focused on this non-traditional definition and commercial solutions and preference for commercial solutions, things like that.
Well, I'm actually quite interested to hear from folks in our audience what they think as they're reading through this and interpreting it, because it's pretty complex stuff. There's the speed and forged overlap and some amount of potential conflict or redundancy or whatever in between those. There's also whether it passes at all and how it affects everybody downstream. A lot to speculate about and analyze. Closing comments. Dave, go for it. You got last word.
Yeah, so it is complicated. I think they're quoted in a couple of these articles, but the general sentiment from Mike Rogers and Adam Smith in their quotes seems to be they really want the Department of Defense to tell its people that it's okay to fail sometimes, that they want them to move very fast, and gone are the days where we are zero risk.
Yeah.
That's not going to work anymore. And you need to build incentive structures where your people are okay moving fast, even though sometimes they drop the ball.
Yeah. This is the whole KOs don't get fired for choosing Anduril or choosing Lockheed or whatever. Yeah.
Nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. Yeah. Nobody ever got fired for choosing Lockheed. Nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
We're not going to fire you for attempting to move very quickly to solve a pressing battlefield need. That's what this says.
Hey, do you want to be the first KO out there to try it out? I wonder, what's
I think some of them do. I mean, think about how many KOs we know that have left government service in the last year, just on reductions in force. There's a lot of cool things happening in the private sector. I think there's plenty of space for a big culture shift to happen right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. What's on the horizon? What do you guys get going on the next week as we wrap?
We'll be on the hill. Doing what I do on the hill.
Got to wear the monkey suit.
Dress up, shake hands.
What about you, Dave? Summer's in full swing on the Upper Peninsula. You gonna be out on the water?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're still moving in, so there's a honey-do list that starts after work every day. I'm trying to get a big pole barn established for all my woodworking equipment to go in. So that's on the docket on the personal side. On the professional side,
do you have any interest in making a bunch of baseboards for me and then driving them down to Virginia?
Absolutely zero, but I can probably send you some great YouTube video links, Simon.
Simon, the right person to influence is not Dave. It's his wife, Jess.
Okay.
100%.
100%.
You want that? You want to make your way onto the Dave honeydew list? Go to Jess.
Yes.
Okay. That's right.
That's right.
But she's got a heart 3 sizes too big. So if you tell her a good story, she'll maybe come down there and help you out.
Oh man. Well, I don't need any baseboards, but I can dream up a couple of things, Dave, I want you to make. Okay, gents, it's been yet another thrilling, exhilarating session with you. I enjoy these more than I may let on, and looking forward to next week's conversation. For everybody out in the audience, refer us to your friends and network. Help us refine the podcast. If you have topics that you want us to cover, send them. If you have critical commentary, send them to Ian, not to me. And We'll see you next week. Adios.